Hi all, welcome back to Microbiology Lectures, and today we're going to start off talking about Plasmodium, or the causative agent of malaria, at least the genera of the causative agent of malaria. Then we're going to talk about some other protozoans as we progress, but malaria first. So the reason why I like to spend a fair amount of time on malaria is it has a really interesting history, and has kind of been an infectious disease in the world for a very long time without much change, which is concerning for a lot of infectious disease experts. We've been working on vaccines for malaria for a very long time, over 50 years, and it looks like we have some promising vaccines for malaria in the works, some that are currently being manufactured, but again, the vaccination rate is not great, I would say. I think 65%, but it also deteriorates over time, so that can be of concern. And then there's a bunch more research that's going into, well, if we can't vaccinate for malaria and our drugs don't do a good job of treating it, although it depends on when you have malaria, what type of malaria you have, on whether or not our drugs treat it very well. But nonetheless, we now have a whole body of researchers that are interested potentially in gene drives and using gene drives to alter mosquito populations, so that mosquitoes can either not transfer malaria or Plasmodium, or potentially mosquitoes can't reproduce, which would knock out a bunch of infectious disease, yellow fever, lots of things, dengue fever, malaria, lots of things are carried by mosquitoes, and sometimes the same species of mosquito can carry be a vector for multiple infectious diseases. But malaria itself, and here's a picture of some malarial spore cysts, but in 2021, we have approximately 230 million people were infected with it, resulting in about 425,000 deaths. That's quite a few people still dying of malaria, even though we haven't seen malaria in North America, South America in a very long time, maybe due to the eradication of the species of mosquito that carries a lot of the malarial plasmodiums, but nonetheless we just don't see it, and so it's a sub-Saharan Africa disease, and now kind of India is also seeing an increase in cases. It's, of course, the mosquitoes are the definitive host. Humans are the intermediate host, but it does cause complications in humans. So this is one of those cases where the intermediate host is not just, that protozoan is not just hanging out, but that protozoan is actually causing complications in the intermediate host. We have 5 or 6, depending on how you break it down, species of malaria that can affect humans. There's probably others, so there's probably more than this, but the 5 common ones, some of which we know most likely where it transmitted from. So the malaria is a zoonotic disease, and it can be transferred from other primates. So some, like Plasmodium malariae, I I think. We've tracked it down to gorillas, and then Knowlesii, I believe, were species of monkeys. But regardless of where these species came from, or how they were transferred to us, because we're primates, often the intermediate host is not species specific for a lot of protozoans. It's as long as their blood type is similar, their immune system is similar, they can invade, they can get established, and that's often what happens when we get these zoonotic diseases. We're close enough. The concerning part that I have, and I like to talk to people about, is looking at the number of individuals that are dying from malaria compared to a lot of the other infectious diseases. So, starting in the 80s when kind of HIV/AIDS popped up, we saw obviously a spike when it came, when that zoonotic disease got established in humans. We see the spike in the 2000s, and we started to see a decrease because we started generating better drugs, better medical capabilities, although we don't have a vaccine for HIV/AIDS, but we have drugs that allow people to live longer with HIV. We have drugs that potentially allow for people to not pass HIV on, etc. And then you look at like measles, meningitis, diarrheal diseases, maybe Giardia or Cryptosporidium, or these other things that might be causing diarrheal diseases, E. coli, these kind of things, respiratory infections like tuberculosis. You see all of these things going down, everyone going down, but malaria. Malaria stays at about 500,000 childhood deaths due to malaria, and it's been that way since 1980. Right? And it's just carrying it out. Yes, vaccines for protozoans are difficult. We know this because vaccinating for eukaryotes is a difficult thing. Treatments are a difficult thing. But this is a huge concern. It's one of, I would say, in top 5 health concerns in the world. Malaria's in the top 5, and so caused by Plasmodium. Just a little more information about Plasmodium in general. It was first described by Laveran, and the parasite itself was described in blood cells, and then Ronald Ross showed that birds could transfer the parasite, and it was transferred from mosquito to bird, and then it could be transferred from one species of bird to another species of bird via mosquito. And Ross's and Laveran's work was awarded the Nobel Prize. And so I believe work on Plasmodium or malaria-related diseases has won 3 or 4 Nobel Prizes. Also, the use of DDT, or the invention or discovery of DDT, a new drug for malaria was awarded a few years ago for it. I think many people are expecting potentially Bill and Melinda Gates to win a Nobel Prize for the amount of resources that they're providing to fight malaria, with bed nets and medicine in different regions that don't have the resources to do so on their own. So just a handful of times you see that Plasmodium's popped up. So it's clearly a world issue. It's a microbiology issue, but nonetheless, I just wanted to kind of put that out there for that. Okay, talking about some other known parasites of humans, the chinoplastids. This is a group of protozoans that have a super interesting kind of structure and ability to avoid our immune system. They have a large mitochondrion which contains rings of DNA that interlock. And so I think a lot of new medications might be trying to maybe lock in on that large mitochondrion. But these are the trypanosomans. So here you can see these cells are nucleated red blood cells. This is from a bird. So birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish all have nucleated red blood cells. So if you ever see like cells that have nucleus and trypanosoma next to them, okay, you know it's coming from a different species. But trypanosoma is not, it can affect many different species. You can find it in probably every vertebrate. Maybe it hasn't been found in every vertebrate, but it probably could be in every vertebrate. Nonetheless, they have unique structures. I showed you a picture earlier of them. They can come in lots of different shapes, sizes. There's a nucleus, and there's that large mitochondria that you can often see, and may be useful for targeting new medications. The interesting piece about the pathogen itself is, say, if we're looking at Trypanosoma brucei, which causes African sleeping sickness, the tsetse fly passes this on, and when the parasite, when the protozoan enters the human blood system, the individual will ramp up an immune response to that protozoan, and it'll phagocytize, it'll destroy some of that protozoan, they'll chase it down, destroy some of it, and then present it to the learned immune system, okay, so like T cells and whatnot. And then something triggers the protozoan, the rest of the protozoans that are in the population. Something triggers it. Maybe it's the consumption, maybe it's the presentation of these proteins, but it triggers the remaining protozoans to switch their outside protein code. Okay, so they develop a new protein code, and that just causes the immune system to now not be able to react to the infection of that trypanosoma. And so then the immune system will go engulf it, destroy it, present it, and it switches it again. And this happens over and over and over again. So having a medication that might be able to target something to help with our immune response to it could be advantageous. Another kind of interesting history of Trypanosoma is the potential cause of Charles Darwin's episodes of dizziness and his episodes of vomiting and sickness that he had when he came back from the voyage on the Beagle. So when Darwin got back from the voyage of the Beagle in the 1830s, when he got back, he was never really the same as what he was before he went. He was always sick, and sick with like just vertigo, and he couldn't walk sometimes. He got really dizzy, he would get sick, and all kinds of things. And there is a little bit of evidence, some compelling evidence that suggests that he might have had Chagas disease. Darwin writes about being bitten by a bug in South America, which we know as an assassin bug, which is sometimes called a kissing bug. But he was bitten by this bug, and he drew pictures of it in his journal, and he talks about it in his this journal. And then we know that that region where he was bitten at has high cases of Chagas disease. And so it's quite possible that Charles Darwin, well, not definitive, but was affected by Chagas disease, which would be a Trypanosoma cruzi. Okay, and there's other diseases that are not just passed on by flies or true bugs, but sand flies can pass on, Leishmania. There's lots of diseases where Trypanosoma can get established. Okay. Lumen-dwelling flagellates, we talked about these already a little bit. Okay. These are organisms like Giardia that can get in the intestinal tract. It's one of the top diarrhea inducers in the world, and but not outside of Giardia. There are other organisms like Trichomonas vaginalis, which is a very common STD in the world, and not that it causes extreme conditions, but it can cause a woman to give birth prematurely, which probably results in a child that's a little bit premature or underdeveloped. And again, the interesting thing more so about this than that it's a common STD is the way at which it generates energy is unique to this group of organisms. So they also lack mitochondria like some of the other groups like amoebas, but they use a hydrogosome, and that means they can go through glycolysis, generate pyruvate but then they use ferredoxin as a intermediate, and that ferredoxin allows them to generate fumarate, which allows them to regenerate NADPH and utilize NADPH for energy, or at least for the hydrogen to drive energy. So kind of a different system unique to this group, and I wouldn't say it's well studied, but it's studied enough that we know a little bit about it, and kind of gives them a unique process. So just like trying to develop medicine for Trypanosoma and looking at that, large mitochondrion with its DNA, there is some evidence that maybe trying to develop medicine that disrupts the hydrogosome of the lumen-dwelling flagellates would give us some kind of better results in treating Giardia or Trichomonas. Okay, so next time we'll talk about algae. Again, algae are kind of an interesting group. Sometimes they're classified as protozoans. Sometimes they're classified as plants. And sometimes it just depends on the algae in which you're talking about. Okay, so next time.